Dexter has always sold itself as a sleek moral paradox, a serial killer who keeps a code, a bloodspatter analyst who treats homicide like a day job, and a man so committed to blending in that he narrates his own life like a guided meditation for predators. On paper, it is an elegant contradiction. On screen, it becomes a masterclass in how quickly a brilliant premise can be diluted by creative decisions that confuse shock value for consequence, melodrama for character work, and a twist for actual narrative development. The complaint aimed at the ending is not subtle. The final season, often expanded to the final stretch of seasons, did damage that goes beyond one misfire. Rewatchability took a hit, not because the early years stopped being effective, but because their emotional trajectory was retroactively poisoned. Great arcs now play like tragic foreknowledge. Every hard-won bond and every carefully built walls closing in escalation feels less like suspense and more like a slow march toward a conclusion that did not respect its own stakes. When a series trains its audience to invest in a long moral chess match, Dexter's double life, Miami Metro's proximity to the truth, the ever-tightening vice of consequence, it cannot then treat its finale like an obligation to clear from a schedule. A convenient culprit appears in the form of leadership. One showrunner is singled out as the turning point, the moment everything went downhill. Whether that attribution is fully fair inside the messy reality of a writer's room is almost irrelevant. The accusation names a recognizable pattern. The later seasons are remembered as a parade of plot lines that should never have survived a first draft. Major psychological revelations are introduced for spectacle and then discarded, as though character continuity were optional. The flagship example is the storyline that has Deb realize she is in love with Dexter and then effectively move on, a choice remembered less as daring drama and more as an instruction to the audience to forget what it just watched. Even the complaint that the finale inspired a desire to sue someone is not really about litigation. It is about betrayal. The show did not simply end. It ended as though it resented the viewer's memory. And yet, the outrage is also a kind of reluctant compliment. It exists because Dexter worked, especially early on, when it committed to structure and theme. The first 2 seasons are praised for their brisk rhythm and procedural propulsion, a clean villain of the week engine that still left room for mythology, moral constraint, and the seduction of Dexter's narration. Season 3 is treated as a drag on momentum, less because it collapses technically, and more because the domestic storyline is experienced as suffocating and tedious. The irritation aimed at Rita in that era functions as shorthand for a broader complaint. The show sometimes mistook domestic life for narrative ballast, rather than narrative pressure, as if trying to be normal were a decorative subplot instead of the central contradiction. Then Season 4 arrives like a reminder of what the show is capable of when it chooses discipline over convenience. The Trinity season is treated as the high watermark. Brilliant casting, methodical build, and a villain whose presence saturates every episode. That excellence also creates the franchise's long-term problem. The early antagonists were so formidable that later villains struggled to catch up in momentum. When escalation becomes harder, the temptation is to substitute consequence with casualty. The franchise, by this account, leaned into killing major characters because it could no longer reliably top the emotional and narrative weight of its best threats. The irony is that these deaths were supposed to raise the stakes, and instead they frequently hollowed them out. Shock can start a fire, but it cannot substitute for a plan to keep it burning. From there, the retrospective becomes an audit. Season 5 is labeled average, competent in isolation, but unimportant to the larger architecture. Lumen's arc is treated as a standalone. It works as a contained story, but it does not meaningfully move Dexter's long game forward. Seasons 6 and 7 produce sharper division. One side argues they are underrated, pointing to Deb's rise into authority over Dexter, the moral tension of her discovery, and the Doomsday Killer storyline as evidence the show still had teeth. There is even respect for the Doomsday crime scenes themselves. Some are considered close to the Ice Truck Killer's artistry, because the franchise still knew how to design a compelling tableau of horror. The other side calls Season 6 nearly as bad as Season 8, framing it as a cautionary tale in wasted potential, and treating the Fight Club-style ending as an emblem of late-series desperation, a concept stapled to the story, not grown from it. Season 7, conversely, is treated by some as a near-ideal springboard. The LaGuardia climax is held up as the kind of irreversible consequence that should have driven the endgame. The walls finally closing in. Miami Metro's proximity to the truth finally becoming more than an atmospheric tease. This is also where some defenders argue Deb's discovery and emotional processing were handled extraordinarily well. Proof the show could still do character work when it chose to. That praise only sharpens the accusation against Season 8, failing to capitalize on the pressure it built, draining significance from LaGuardia, and letting the promised reckoning dissolve into narrative evasiveness. The complaint is not simply that Season 8 was bad, it is that it made Season 7 feel pointless. Underneath the season rankings sits a more structural complaint. Dexter repeatedly positions itself to confront its own moral thesis, and then retreats at the moment of payment. The show loves the spectacle of crossroads. Dexter is cornered, the code is tested, the normal life is threatened, a choice must be made. Then, often, someone else makes the ugliest choice for him. Season 2 is the clearest illustration. Dexter circles 3 options around Dokes: kill him, frame him, or confess, flirting with real accountability, only to have a third party resolve the dilemma by killing Dokes first. The result is not clever, it is convenient. Dexter is spared both the moral stain of murder and the procedural risk of a frame job collapsing. The story hits a reset button, and the audience is expected to pretend it is a character beat. Season 7 echoes the pattern differently. Dexter is poised to kill LaGuardia, and Deb intervenes, doing the deed for him. This is acknowledged as less of a dodge. Dexter's intent is unmistakable, but the structural result is similar. The narrative redirects the most damning action so Dexter can remain morally ambiguous without becoming morally accountable. The series wants the thrill of watching a monster approach a line, while also wanting the comfort of pretending the monster did not really cross it. That is a precarious balance even in the best hands. Here, it became a habit. That habit is why the question of Batista's fate in newer installments becomes so combustible. Batista is not merely a supporting character. He is one of Dexter's most enduring mirrors of decency and professional legitimacy. If Batista dies, there is a strong demand that Dexter be the one to do it, not out of cruelty, but out of narrative integrity. Stop outsourcing the protagonist's worst actions to convenient third parties. Dexter has already killed innocents. Dexter has already bent his code when survival demanded it. If the franchise wants to explore what "don't get caught" actually means, then it cannot keep protecting its lead character from the consequences of that rule. This argument is not bloodlust. It is a request for the story to finally be honest about the kind of man it centers. The counter-arguments are revealing in their own way. Some insist Dexter killing Batista would destroy the character the series spent years developing, an act so corrosive it would negate the entire emotional construction. Others counter that it would not dishonor the code at all, because the first rule is survival, and a man like Batista, without obvious leverage, forces Dexter into darker tactics, perhaps framing him as an accessory to murder to neutralize pursuit. Still others predict an even more familiar dodge. A new obsessive character discovers the truth, kills Batista to protect Dexter, and Dexter responds by killing the interloper, thereby preserving the illusion that he did not truly choose to murder the colleague he admired. In other words, the franchise's favorite magic trick. Someone else commits the unforgivable act, so Dexter can remain complicated rather than condemned. Alongside these debates sits a broader fantasy of how it should have ended, less as indulgence than as an attempt to restore thematic coherence. The proposed repair is blunt. Brian Moser should have been the final villain. Introducing Brian in Season 1 is viewed as premature, before Dexter had accumulated enough history, enough complicated relationships, betrayals, and self-delusions for the reunion to detonate at maximum emotional force. A late series Brian would not just be a threat, he would be a verdict. This repair plan often includes keeping Dokes alive until the end, turning his suspicion into a long-term pressure that forces Dexter to live under sustained surveillance. That idea is attractive because Dokes is uniquely suited to the role, the rare character who refuses to be charmed by Dexter's performance. Even this alternate endgame concedes reality. Keeping Dokes around for 8 seasons risks becoming repetitive, a cat-and-mouse dynamic stretched until it turns into self-parody. Likewise, saving the best villains for the end may sound satisfying, but television does not run on artistic purity. A series does not know it will survive 8 seasons when making Season 1. Deploying top-tier antagonists early can be a survival strategy. Hook the audience, secure renewals, then plan the grand finale. The frustration is not that Dexter used its best cards early. It is that, after proving it could write at that level, it too often acted as though escalation could be replaced by convenience. Nowhere is the sense of betrayal sharper than in Deborah's end. Deb is framed as the show's most formidable constant, abrasive, loyal, brave, and emotionally raw in a way that grounds Dexter's careful detachment. Watching that character reduced to a vegetative state and removed is condemned as both anticlimactic and thematically hollow. The objection is not to death itself, it is to meaning. Deb does not feel like a character built for a quiet, clinical departure. A death in a firefight, a sacrifice to protect Harrison, a final act of defiant loyalty, something with agency and consequence, would align with who she was. Instead, the show offered a death that reads like paperwork, efficient, unromantic, and strangely indifferent to the character's accumulated weight. The dissatisfaction extends to Rita's death, and what it signals about the franchise's relationship to its own idea of humanity. A distinction is drawn between the television version and its literary origin point. The on-screen Dexter is defined by his ongoing attempt to be human, to participate in family life, and to believe that monstrous impulses can coexist with genuine love. Killing off Rita and Deb is framed as more than tragedy. It is described as a weakening of the moral experiment. If Dexter's story is about the struggle to be something other than a monster, then repeatedly removing the human anchors that make that struggle meaningful risks turning the experiment into a gimmick, tragedy as a shortcut to seriousness. It also shifts the experience of rewatching. Early seasons become more painful, not because they are poorly made, but because their hopefulness becomes ironic. Trinity is widely defended as the franchise's most effective villain, because his season understands this theme and applies it with clarity. Lithgow's performance is praised not only as technically excellent, but as psychologically disarming. The ordinary facade of a family man paired with a predatory interior. Trinity is terrifying because he kills with an unsettling ease and unpredictability, because the implied scale of his violence spans decades, and because the season allows proximity. The audience sees process, not merely aftermath. Victims are not abstract crime scenes. They are people caught in a ritual. That choice matters because it forces emotional weight into the story, rather than letting it hide behind police tape. The season's construction is praised for methodical layering. Every episode adds another piece: a return of Lundy, a deeper understanding of Trinity's rituals, a growing sense of inevitability. Twists are present, but they function as supplements rather than substitutes. The story does not rely on a late reveal to create interest. This is contrasted with later villains, Travis Marshall, Gemini, and others, where the twist is often treated as the only memorable feature. Trinity is also credited with shaping the franchise's direction. Rita's death does not just shock, it reorients Dexter's life and restarts the show's central cycle. being born in blood and trying to outgrow it, only to repeat it. Trinity also functions as the cleanest foil to Dexter, a reflection of what Dexter might become if stripped of any restraint. Dexter wants genuine connection. Rita, Harrison, Deb, Hannah, and repeatedly seeks people who can see him, or at least tolerate parts of him. He befriends Miguel because he wants companionship. He struggles with Brian because kinship tempts him. He is drawn to Lila because she offers acceptance without judgment. But every attempt to reconcile the dark passenger with a normal life places those people in the crossfire. Trinity's season articulates that dilemma with unusual discipline. The mirage of the perfect family is revealed as rotten, and the lesson is delivered with brutal clarity. Double lives do not create safety, they create targets. By contrast, later antagonists are often treated as ideas that arrived without sufficient time to become fully realized. The brain surgeon is cited as having potential to rival Trinity, but lacking development. Isaac Serco is singled out as a figure who could have carried sustained pressure across seasons, a long-term threat that would have allowed the show to build rather than sprint. The Doomsday Killer season receives an especially split assessment. The murders and crime scenes are praised as inventive and chilling, yet the season's execution is criticized for leaning into contrivance, including an ending that feels more like a stunt than an earned conclusion. The attempt to claim that Season 6's criticism is the reason the novels can never be adapted is met with skepticism. Religious themes on television are not the same thing as the novel's more overt supernatural elements, and the argument is judged incoherent without clearer grounding. What does survive that debate is a more durable point. Later seasons attracted heavy criticism, but not necessarily because audiences rejected ambition. They rejected writing that felt unmoored from the show's own rules, and from the consequences it repeatedly promised to deliver. Even strong actors can only do so much when a script treats continuity as negotiable. The claim that performers seem to be phoning it in is less an insult than an acknowledgement of what happens when material stops justifying effort. It is also why there is particular irritation that the show could make prestigious casting feel wasted. If a series can render exceptional actors dull, the problem is not the actor. The revival era's success is framed less as a mystery than as network economics dressed up as cultural destiny. Dexter surged again on streaming, recirculated through clips and algorithmic rediscovery, boosted by marketing pushes, and amplified by short-form edits that introduced the franchise to viewers who missed its original run. A younger audience rediscovers the series. Older executives notice the numbers. The franchise returns because it remains one of the few reliable cash cow brands left. This is not romantic. It is rational. It is also why the Dexter universe now expands into multiple directions at once. Sequels, prequels, and the steady promise of more. Because a familiar voice is easier to monetize than an untested idea. Within that ecosystem, the franchise has learned to package nostalgia as craft. New Blood is treated by some as emotional closure, imperfect, but intentional enough to feel like a corrective after the original finale. For others, it simply proves the franchise cannot stop circling the same question. Can Dexter survive his nature without destroying everyone around him? Without committing to a final answer? Even so, the appetite for more is unmistakable, and not only because nostalgia sells. There is genuine affection for the format, the voiceover, the inner logic of the code, the procedural pleasures of watching Dexter apply forensic intelligence while hiding in plain sight. That voice can be strangely soothing, which is a sentence that sounds like a joke, until it becomes the clearest explanation for why the show remains compulsively watchable. Original Sin is evaluated through the unforgiving lens of casting and mimicry, and emerges surprisingly well. The Miami Metro Ensemble and Dexter himself are described as physically uncanny. Deb's actor is defended on performance grounds, perhaps not a perfect match in appearance, but precise in cadence and mannerisms. Harry's casting is identified as the biggest departure, and yet the change is rationalized through an interpretive lens that is persuasive. The original series often presented Harry through flashbacks and hallucinations, filtered by Dexter's perspective, which means the Harry remembered there is not necessarily the man as he was. The prequel in this reading is not violating canon, it is correcting a biased memory. It also smuggles in a more adult truth. Most people know their parents as roles, not as people, and a prequel that exposes a parent's flaws is arguably more honest than one that simply preserves the legend. The praise extends to behavioral detail, subtle quirks, laughs, and physical habits that suggest actors studied rhythms, not just faces. Even a running joke about Batista's wardrobe becomes a small victory for continuity. Some things, apparently, never evolve. The overall verdict is that the prequel captures the feel of the world, which is the only kind of nostalgia that actually matters. Familiarity is easy. Embodied authenticity is not. The viewing order is treated with procedural seriousness as well. New Blood first, then Original Sin, because the prequel reportedly opens with a spoiler-adjacent framing move that undercuts the sequel's tension. In other words, even the franchise's revival comes with instructions, because Dexter cannot simply exist, it must also be curated. Resurrection is treated as the most demanding test, a sequel that must recapture the Miami-era appeal without simply photocopying it. Early impressions are unusually strong. Claims of consistently high episode quality circulate, sometimes accompanied by rating figures that are mentioned and then dismissed as secondary. What matters is the feeling, tension returning, scenes that echo Dexter's old professional competence, and the sense that the franchise is, at least temporarily, remembering what it is. Viewers highlight moments that feel like the Miami days, even when the setting is elsewhere, speculate about longer arcs in future seasons, and imagine antagonists that deserve a full season's chase, rather than being wrapped up as a subplot. The optimism carries a familiar caveat, because the franchise has trained its audience to fear the last mile. Optimism, naturally, never arrives unchallenged. There is open worry that the final episodes will collapse into anticlimax, that the franchise's talent for self-sabotage will reassert itself at the exact moment it must deliver. Complicating suspense is the belief that the series is intended to continue across multiple seasons. An ongoing plan can make viewers less confident in a strong ending. If the story must keep running, the most definitive consequences, arrest, death, total exposure, become less likely. That drains uncertainty and fuels the grimly practical prediction that Dexter will either kill Batista or get rid of him in some other fashion to preserve forward motion. Even supporters of the revival admit the plan risks turning the ending predictable, because serialized storytelling only works when the audience believes the story is willing to end. The indignation around the franchise is not limited to plot. It extends to a sense of squandered talent. There is a lingering resentment that central performers did not receive quality work afterward, commensurate with what they carried here, as though the franchise managed to tarnish not only itself, but the professional narrative of the people who made it work. Fair or not, it frames the decline as wasted ability. In the same spirit, there is specific annoyance that the later seasons could make excellent actors feel ineffective. The complaint is less that talent vanished, and more that the writing gave it nowhere credible to go. When a show's scripts become contortions, the cast's job becomes to sell the contortion, and eventually the contortion wins. And still, for all the criticism, Dexter endures. It is described as a comfort show, rewatched to excess, consumed through endless clips, and soothed by narration that functions like background sound. That obsessive rewatch culture is not a defense of bad writing. It is evidence of a rare tonal alchemy. The inner monologue, the ritual, the procedural texture, and the performance at the center created something strangely calming, which is precisely why it works. Some series comfort through warmth. This one comforts through familiarity with darkness, and it does so with enough style that viewers keep returning, even while insisting the franchise has betrayed them. The contradiction is not accidental. It is the brand. The franchise now sits in a familiar, humiliating position. Given another chance, praised cautiously when it earns it, and watched with the suspicion of someone who has seen this trick before. The audience is not demanding perfection for many viewers. It is demanding that the series stop cheating. If Dexter is to continue, then the story must either accept that he will finally pay for the life he has led, or embrace the darker honesty that he will do whatever it takes not to. The only unacceptable option is the old habit of building toward accountability and then refusing to pay it. Subscribe for more.